Hi, Year 2. Welcome to your Monday English lesson. We're going to start with a little bit of handwriting. Then we're going to start reading our brand new book, which I'm really looking forward to. So let's get going. Done really well with our handwriting. We're going to move on to the letter U today. Should be really easy. The only difference to normal is that instead of starting halfway up and just going down, down, up, and back down, we're going to start on the line because, like I've said a few times, we'll normally be joining from another letter. And actually today we'll be joining from a C, which would end there. So we'll just go up to the start of our U. Down, back up, down, and flick. Up, down, touch the line, back up, down, and a flick. Okay, actually looks like two eyes next to each other, so that should be quite an easy letter to do. So have a go and unpause the video when you finished. Okay, we're going to put that into a word now. All right, we're going to put it into the word cute, just like my doggy. We've already done a C, that should be easy. We've done a T, that should be easy. And we did an E the other day, so that should be easy. So hopefully this will be quite an easy word to do. All right, so we're going to do our C. Touch the line into that U we've just practiced. T is our tall letter. Straight back down into our E, and then we go back at the end to cross our T. Yeah, show you that one more time. So we're going to do our C into our U, all the way up when we do our T. And there's our E. And we'll just cross our T. Hopefully your E, your U and your C will be about the same size and your T will be much, much taller. Just have a go at one line of T, and when you're ready, unpause the video. Okay, let's go to our English lesson. Where are we? There we go. So we're going to start reading the BFG. The BFG is one of my favourite books by Roald Dahl. Okay. This is one of the pictures from one of the front covers. Just want you to pause the video in a sec and just think, what do you think will happen? Who do you think the main characters are? What do you think is going to happen? When do you think the story is set? I'm just going to move that so you can see the whole thing. Where is the story set? And why have these two met? What's that big thing he's got as well? It's like a trumpet or something. So pause the video, have a little think, and then we're going to read the first couple of chapters. Okay. So we're going to read the first couple of chapters. Do you know, I'm going to share the screen with you so that you can read on your own if you want to, because you're all really good readers now. Where are we? Okay, I've actually got it online. So this is the BFG by Roald Dahl. The witching hour. Sophie couldn't sleep. A brilliant moonbeam was slanting through a gap in the curtains. It was shining right onto her pillow. The other children in the dormitory had been asleep for hours. Sophie closed her eyes and lay quite still. She tried very hard to doze off. It was no good. The moonbeam was like a silver blade slicing through the room onto her face. The house was completely silent. No voices came up from downstairs. There were no footsteps on the floor above either. The window behind the curtain was wide open, but nobody was walking on the pavement outside. No cars went by on the street. Not the tiniest sound could be heard anywhere. Sophie had never known such silence. Perhaps, she told herself, this was what they called the witching hour. The witching hour, somebody had once whispered to her, was a special moment in the middle of the night when every child and every grown-up was in a deep, deep sleep, and all the dark things came out from hiding and had the world to themselves. The moonbeam was brighter than ever on Sophie's pillow. She decided to get out of bed and close the gap in the curtains. You got punished if you were caught out of bed after lights out. Even if you said you had to go to the lavatory, that was not accepted as an excuse, and they punished you just the same. But there was no one about now. Sophie was sure of that. She reached out for her glasses that lay on the chair beside her bed. They had steel rims and very thick lenses, and she could hardly see a thing without them. She put them on, then she slipped out of bed and tiptoed over to the window. When she reached the curtains, Sophie hesitated. She longed to duck underneath them and lean out of the window to see what the world looked like now that the witching hour was at hand. She listened again. Everything was deathly still. The longing to look out became so strong she couldn't resist it. Quickly, she ducked under the curtains and leaned out the window. In the silvery moonlight, the village street she knew so well seemed completely different. The houses looked bent and crooked, like houses in a fairy tale. Everything was pale and ghostly and milky white. Across the road, she could see Mrs. Ranch's shop, where you bought buttons and wool and bits of elastic. It didn't look real. There was something dim and misty about that too. Sophie allowed her eye to travel further and further down the street. Suddenly, she froze. There was something coming up the street on the opposite side. It was something black, something tall, and something black. Something very tall and very black and very thin. Who? It wasn't a human. It couldn't be. It was 4 times as tall as the tallest human. It was so tall that its head was higher than the upstairs window of the houses. Sophie opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat, like her whole body, was frozen with fright. This was the witching hour, all right. The tall black figure was coming her way. It was keeping very close to the houses across the street, hiding in shadowy places where there was no moonlight. On and on it came, nearer and nearer, but it was moving in spurts. It would stop, then it would move on, then it would stop again. But what on earth was it doing? Aha! Sophie could see now what it was up to. It was stopping in front of each house. It would stop and peer into the upstairs window of each house in the street. It actually had to bend down to peer into the upstairs windows. That's how tall it was. It would stop and peer in. Then it would slide on to the next house and stop again and peer in, and so on all along the street. It was much closer now, and Sophie could see it more clearly. Looking at it carefully, she decided that it had to be some kind of person. Obviously, it was not a human, but it was definitely a person. A giant person, perhaps. Sophie stared hard across the misty, moonlit street. The giant, if that's what it was wearing a long black cloak. In one hand, he was holding what looked like a very long, thin trumpet. In the other hand, he held a large suitcase. The giant had stopped now, right in front of Mr. and Mrs. Gucci's house. The Gucci's had a greengrocer's shop in the middle of the high street, and the family lived above the shop. The 2 Gucci children slept in the upstairs front room. Sophie knew that. The giant was peering through the window into the room where Michael and Jane Gucci were sleeping. From across the street, Sophie watched and held her breath. She saw the giant step back a pace and put the suitcase down on the pavement. He bent over and opened the suitcase. He took something out of it. It looked like a glass jar, one of those square ones with a screw top. He unscrewed the top of the jar and poured what was into it into the end of the long trumpet thing. Sophie watched, trembling. She saw the giant straighten up again, and she saw him poke the trumpet in through the open upstairs window of the room where the Gucci children were sleeping. She saw the giant take a deep breath and he blew through the trumpet. No noise came out, but it was obvious to Sophie that whatever had been in the jar had now been blown through the trumpet into the Gucci children's bedroom. What could it be? As the giant withdrew the trumpet from the window and bent down to pick up the suitcase, he happened to turn his head and glance across the street. In the moonlight, Sophie caught a glimpse of an enormous, long, pale, wrinkly face with the most enormous ears. The nose was as sharp as a knife, and above the nose there were two bright, flashing eyes, and the eyes were staring straight at Sophie. There was a fierce, devilish look about them. Sophie gave a yelp and pulled back from the window. She flew across the dormitory and jumped into her bed and hid under the blanket. And there she crouched, still as a mouse and tingling all over. Chapter 2, The Snatch. Under the blanket, Sophie waited. After a minute or so, she lifted the corner of the blanket and peeped out. For the second time that night, her blood froze to ice and she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. There, at the window, with the curtains pushed aside, was the enormous, long, pale, wrinkly face of the giant person, staring in. The flashing black eyes were fixed on Sophie's bed. The next moment, a huge hand with pale fingers came snaking in through the window. This was followed by an arm as thick as a tree trunk, and the arm, the hand, the fingers were reaching out across the room towards Sophie's bed. This time, Sophie really did scream, but only for a second, because very quickly the huge hand clamped down over her blanket and the scream was smothered by the bedclothes. Sophie, crouching under the blanket, felt strong fingers grasping hold of her, and then she was lifted up from her bed, blanket and all, and whisked out the window. If you can think of anything more terrifying than that happening to you in the middle of the night, then let's hear about it. The awful thing was that Sophie knew exactly what was going on, although she couldn't see it happening. She knew that the monster, or giant, with enormous, long, pale, wrinkly face and dangerous eyes, had plucked her from her bed in the middle of the witching hour and was now carrying her out through the window, smothered in a blanket. What actually happened next was this. When the giant had got Sophie outside, he arranged the blanket so he could grasp all four corners of it at once in one of his huge hands, with Sophie imprisoned inside. In the other hand, he seized the suitcase and the long trumpet, and off he ran. And we're going to stop there for today. So, Sophie lives in an orphanage. Okay, so an orphanage is it's a place where people who don't have mums and dads, they all live in an orphanage together, and there might be lots and lots of children all in one room. Okay, so Sophie is in her orphanage bed, but there are lots of other people. Here's a girls' orphanage, so there are lots of other girls in bed as well, but of course they're all asleep. I want you to imagine that you were in the orphanage. Okay, so the night that Sophie got snatched from her bed, to imagine that you were there and that you've been asked to write in detail about what you saw for the police. So what did you see and how did you feel? Okay. So normally if you have to fill in a report, it would look something like this. You must complete the full police incident form. So you can use these questions and they'll help you with your writing today, okay? So question 1, why was Sophie out of bed? Question 2, why did you keep quiet? What were you afraid of? Question 3, what did you see coming through the window? I want you to describe how it looked, how it moved, and how it sounded. What do you think it was? And then I want you to think, what did you do after Sophie was taken? Did someone arrive? Who was the first person to arrive to help you? And then what did you see out of the window after Sophie had gone? Okay, so lots of questions to be thinking about there. And I've also got some pictures ready. Now, these pictures are from the film. You might have seen the film of the BFG before. If you haven't, don't worry, but don't watch it. Don't watch it until we've finished all of our writing, because we're going to be doing this for 2 weeks, and I will ask you to watch it at the end. All right. So at the beginning, Sophie is just reading her book. But then she goes to the window. She sees a hand. And then she sees the figure. And then that big hand comes through the window and grabs her. Okay, sounds a little bit scary. Don't worry though, it's just a story, it's not real. Okay, so don't worry, don't want anyone getting frightened, it's not real. So here are some ways that you could start your writing today, all right? You might start with, it was an ordinary night and everyone was fast asleep. Or, the moon was shining through the crack in the curtain and I heard Sophie stirring. Or this, it was very late when I first heard Sophie moving. Or, I was woken up by the noise of the curtains being pushed aside. Or, I had been kept awake by the silvery moonlight when I saw... And we're going to stop there. So I'm going to end on... I'm just going to go back to that. And I'm going to leave that there. If you want to pause the video here, that's fine. Pause it now, because you might want those questions. All right. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm looking forward to your first piece of writing about the BFG. Imagine you saw everything. Okay. Off you go. And I will see you tomorrow.